In our increasingly digital world, that question of who are you online, it feels both simple and incredibly complex
He
sometimes.
really does.
Today, we're diving deep into a blueprint for tackling that complexity, something you actually asked us to explore, a digital identity trust framework.
Hmm.
Specifically, we're looking at this really detailed document, the Moresburg Model for Trust Framework and Schemes.
Yeah, it's quite comprehensive.
Think of it as like the instruction manual for building a trustworthy system for proving who we are online.
Exactly. We've got this guide that essentially lays the foundation for a digital world where we can have much greater confidence, in online identities.
So what's our mission for this deep dive then?
Well, our mission is really to understand the core building blocks of this Moresburg model and, crucially, why they matter.
Right.
This isn't just abstract thinking. It directly impacts how you might access services, make transactions, and generally interact online with, well, more assurance in the future.
Okay, so let's get into this Moresburg model. Right off the bat, it presents this two-layered structure. You've got the National Digital Identity Trust Framework and then these scheme operator governance manuals. It's almost like the big overarching rules and then the more specific practical ways those rules get applied. Is that fair?
That's the spot-on way to think about it, yeah. Consider the National Digital Identity Trust Framework as maybe the constitution of this digital identity world.
Well,
The fundamental principles, the regulations that everyone involved has to respect. It establishes those high-level ideals like trust, safeguarding your private information, accountability.
and the scheme operator governance manuals. Those would be like the more detailed laws or, I don't know, operational procedures.
Yeah.
The specifics of how different systems actually work within that big framework.
Precisely. These manuals are more tailored. They act almost like contracts, really. They detail exactly how different schemes or specific uses of digital identity think logging into your bank versus, say, proving your age online, how they'll operate while still sticking to that common foundation, the trust framework.
Right, so you get consistency, but also flexibility for different needs.
Exactly.
It allows for both.
So let's zoom in on this National Digital Identity Trust Framework first.
The document really emphasizes governance right from the start.
Yeah.
Why is having a strong governing body so essential for something like this?
Oh, governance is absolutely critical. I mean, it's about establishing who's in charge, how decisions get made, how the whole system is kept on track, and importantly, held accountable.
Okay.
The Moresburg model proposes an independent regulator, and crucially, with legal powers granted by legislation.
So actual legal teeth.
That legal backing is key, yeah, because it gives the framework teeth, like you said. Next year, participants are legally obligated to follow the rules, not just, encouraged.
So it's not just about best intentions. There's real legal weight. And this governance, it isn't set in stone, is it? I think the framework mentions how it gets updated and maintained.
That's right. A robust framework needs to adapt, right? New challenges, new tech.
Sure.
So it outlines how it will be updated, maintained over time, and even includes a process for potential arbitration if disagreements pop up.
Okay, a way to resolve disputes. That sounds important for stability.
Crucial for long-term stability and credibility, definitely. And those guiding principles, trust, privacy, accountability, they act as a constant compass for all its activities.
Now, another big piece is accreditation. This sounds like how we make sure the entities involved, the ones providing the digital identities, are trustworthy, and how we deal with maybe bad actors.
That's a great way to put it. Accreditation is the process, the formal certification, that participants meet the standards and rules of the trust framework. The goal is to create a system where, users and businesses can have confidence in certified providers.
Like a seal of approval.
Kind of, yeah. The governing body might even maintain a public register of these trusted providers. A sort of good housekeeping seal, as you say, for digital identity services.
It's interesting, though. The businesses and services that accept these digital identities, the relying parties, like an online store maybe, they might not be directly certified themselves.
Right.
But they're still bound by the rules in the scheme manuals. A bit like how a shop takes credit cards. They have to follow the card network's rules.
That's precisely the analogy the document uses, and it clarifies that distinction really well. The focus of the trust framework certification is on the entities providing the digital identity services.
Okay.
But the scheme rules extend obligations to those who rely on these identities to make sure they use them responsibly. Think of your bank or an online retailer, they're the relying party.
And this accreditation process, it has a few distinct levels, doesn't it? There's a national accreditation service, then the certification assessment bodies, and finally the certified providers themselves. Why the layers?
Yeah, think of it like a system of checks and balances. It's designed to build strong trust and minimize bias.
How so?
Well, the government might appoint a national accreditation service to oversee the whole thing and, importantly, accredit the independent certification assessment bodies, or CAs.
Okay, CABs.
These CAs are like independent auditors. They're accredited to international standards themselves, ISO IE 17065, to ensure they're competent and impartial.
Right.
Then, the actual companies offering identity services, they contract with these CABEs to get audited against the trust framework's rules. If they pass, they become certified providers.
So it adds rigor having different independent bodies involved.
Exactly. It adds rigor because you have different independent entities verifying compliance at each stage, reduces the risk of a single point of failure or, bias. And if a certified provider messes up, the independent CAB investigates.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So governance sets the rules. Multi-layered accreditation checks providers are following them. Now, how do we know if the whole system is actually working? Is it effective? That's where monitoring comes in, right?
Exactly right. The framework outlines how its success will be tracked, evaluated, and this isn't just about, technical uptime.
Right.
It's about whether the system is achieving its core objectives. Things like reducing identity fraud, enhancing user privacy, making things easier for people, maybe even contributing to economic growth.
So measurable goals.
Yeah, the model talks about using key indicators, performance metrics. And a crucial element is that participants will be required to regularly report on these metrics.
So it's data-driven. I saw they even mentioned things like inclusion reports, making sure it's accessible to everyone, and reports on fraud and threats.
Absolutely. That's key for staying ahead of problems. A strong trust framework needs that continuous evaluation and improvement based on what's actually happening out there.
Now, what happens if something goes wrong for a user? The framework also discusses redress. What kind of support or solutions are we talking about here?
Yeah, redress focuses on establishing the responsibilities of participants and, crucially, the rights of users. It sets minimum standards that relying parties can expect from certified providers for user support, issue resolution.
Okay.
At the national framework level, though, the emphasis is more on fundamental legal protections, like helping someone restore and repair their digital identity if it's been compromised. It's less about directly handling financial losses that might be covered more at the scheme level.
Okay, so fixing the identity itself is the priority at this level, not necessarily immediate financial compensation.
Got it.
And if a provider really violates the rules or harms the framework's integrity, there's enforcement too.
Oh, yes. The governance authority has the power to take action against providers who damage the framework's reputation or break the law.
Like what?
This can include imposing fines, temporarily suspending or permanently revoking their certification and their listing on the trust register, requiring specific corrective actions, and in serious cases, even pursuing legal proceedings.
So real consequences.
Definitely real consequences for noncompliance.
That provides some reassurance. Okay, let's dive into the policies now. These seem to form the foundation of this whole framework. Looks like several layers here, starting with core principles.
Yes, these principles are like the fundamental ethical values. They underpin the entire trust framework.
What sort of things?
Well, the Moresburg Model lists key areas like ensuring everyone can access and use the system. That's inclusion and accessibility, giving individuals control over their digital identity and data user control, making it easy to use usability, protecting personal information confidentiality, respecting data rights, operating transparently.
Okay, quite a list.
Yeah, ensuring security and integrity, fair use of data, getting clear consent and offering choices, and overall accountability. These principles act as sort of enduring guidelines for the framework's design and any future updates. Think of them as the core values the whole system is built on.
And then we move on to legislation. That's what gives the framework its legal authority, its standing, right?
Exactly. Legislation provides that statutory basis for the trust framework and the governance authority. It can cover a whole range of crucial aspects.
Like
the framework's life cycle, how providers register, the specific powers of the governance body, how fees might work, the legal status and use of the trust mark, even legal recognition of different identity verification levels.
Next up are the overarching rules. These sound like the fundamental requirements everyone participating has to meet.
These are the core outcome-focused rules. Certified providers have to adhere to them. The aim is to set clear expectations for behavior, for performance, without dictating the specific tech or business models they must use.
So, tech agnostic to some degree.
Right. These rules cover essential things like ensuring participants operate legitimately as businesses, comply with all other relevant laws, data privacy, anti-discrimination, and making sure sanctioned individuals or entities are excluded.
The document also mentions areas of good practice, how organizations should manage employees, handle service delivery, complaints, data security, risk management. Sounds like guidance, not strict rules.
Precisely. These good practice areas offer a roadmap, you could say, for providers to show their commitment to quality, security, user satisfaction. Important guidance for maintaining high standards.
And within these rules, the framework also clearly defines the different roles, right? Identity service providers, attribute providers, wallet providers, scheme operators. It lays out who does what.
Absolutely. Defining these roles and their responsibilities is essential for understanding how the different pieces of the system fit together and interact.
Okay, let's talk about the trust mark. We've all seen those logos online meant to signify trust, security. What's the idea behind this one in the Moresburg model?
So the trust mark is intended to be that visible symbol that users and relying parties can recognize. It indicates that a provider has been certified as compliant with the trust framework.
A visual shortcut for trust.
Kind of, yeah. A shortcut to signify a degree of trust and adherence to standards. The framework emphasizes needing clear guidelines on how it can be used and, importantly, preventing misuse, maybe even through technical checks.
But it's not a universal acceptance mark.
Crucially, no. Just because a provider has it doesn't automatically mean their digital ID will be accepted everywhere. That depends on specific agreements within individual schemes.
Right, okay, so adherence to standards, not guaranteed acceptance. Then there's certification itself, we touched on it. But the framework outlines the whole life cycle, validity periods, suspension, revocation, recertification. Sounds like an ongoing commitment.
It is indeed. Certification isn't a one-time thing. The life cycle includes, defined validity periods, specific conditions for suspension or revocation if rules are broken, requirements for regular checkup audits, a process for managing framework updates through version control.
And needing to recertify periodically.
Exactly, to demonstrate continued compliance. It also covers potentially needing extra certifications for specific services, and even how certifications might be phased out if part of the framework is retired.
The framework also mentions good practice guidance in areas like verifying identity initially, managing it over time, authentication strength, verifying attributes like age or address, monitoring threats. This seems aimed at practical advice.
Exactly. To ensure a consistent, reliable level of trust, the framework suggests developing detailed guidance in these key operational areas. It helps providers implement effective processes and lets relying parties understand the level of confidence they can have in a particular digital ID.
Could there be sector-specific guidance too? Like for finance or health?
Right. Yeah, the potential for sector-specific guidance is mentioned too, tailored to those needs.
Okay, finally under policies. The Code of Conduct. This sounds like something for the average user. A plain language summary.
That's precisely its purpose.
Yeah.
It's a user-friendly summary of the trust framework's key policies. Explains in simple terms what the framework is, why users should feel confident, who's included, the benefits, where and when these digital IDs can be used, and importantly, how users can get help or raise concerns.
And concise, hopefully.
The goal is concise and clear, yeah. Ideally, just a couple of pages, making it accessible to everyone.
Okay, that's a really thorough look at the National Digital Identity Trust Framework. Now let's move on to that second critical layer, the scheme operator governance manuals. How do these build on that foundation we've just discussed?
Right, so these manuals are where the rubber meets the road for specific digital identity schemes. They take the high-level principles and rules from the trust framework and translate them into the very practical details of how a particular scheme, say a national digital ID for government services, will actually operate.
So the how-to for specific uses.
Exactly. They ensure that all participants within that specific scheme adhere to both the overarching trust framework obligations and any extra requirements specific to that scheme. And for entities maybe not directly certified under the trust framework itself, like many relying parties, these manuals clearly outline their responsibilities within that particular scheme.
So while the trust framework is the general rule book, these are the detailed operating procedures for different applications. And governance is still key here, too.
Absolutely. The scheme operator governance manuals also address governance, but specifically for the operation of that individual scheme.
Different possible structures.
Yeah, the document outlines various potential governance structures. Could be a dedicated operational entity appointed by the Trust Framework Authority, could be an independent commercial organization, even a consortium of participants. The crucial aspect here is that the rules within the scheme are legally enforceable through commercial contracts between the participants.
Okay, contracts make it binding. Accreditation also plays a role at the scheme level, but it sounds like maybe more than just the basic trust framework certification.
Yes, at the scheme level, the manuals define the specific certification processes needed for participants to offer services within that scheme. The scheme operator is responsible for ensuring everyone maintains their trust framework standing and only provides services they're certified for within that scheme.
Some more specific checks.
Right, and these manuals likely include more detailed rules around commercial stuff, liabilities, service levels, specific technical standards maybe not covered broadly.
And the scheme operator ensures everyone, including relying parties, meets the obligations.
Exactly. They have to ensure all relevant trust framework obligations are passed down, and they'll have a comprehensive accreditation system could involve technical checks, contracts, procedures, maybe using external auditors, their own teams, or even self-assessment sometimes.
A really crucial part of making any digital ID system work is getting businesses and services to actually accept them. That's where acceptance by relying parties comes in. Sounds like the scheme operator is vital there.
Indeed. A primary function of a scheme operator is building and nurturing this acceptance network. They bring together the identity service providers, issuing the IDs, and the relying parties, the businesses, the services who will accept them, creates a functioning ecosystem.
Maybe a specific acceptance mark for the scheme.
Yeah, the scheme might introduce a specific acceptance mark, a visual cue telling users where this particular digital ID can be used. The scheme operator often acts as a market maker, developing the commercial model, the go-to-market strategy to encourage adoption.
I saw a mention of a flywheel model.
Yeah, the document highlights that. The idea is positive user experiences across multiple uses, different situations, encourage more users and more relying parties to join, creates a positive growth cycle. It even suggests a benchmark, kind of. 3 uses, 3 contexts, 3 months, as a goal for building user confidence and advocacy.
Interesting benchmark. And just like at the trust framework level, there needs to be a way to handle things when they go wrong within a specific scheme, right?
Yeah,
Especially correcting info, restoring identities, identity repair, and redress.
absolutely. The scheme rules must detail the specific processes for identity repair within that scheme, outlining how users correct inaccuracies, restore their identity if an error happens,
Defining responsibilities again.
clearly defining responsibilities of all participants, the procedures for reporting issues, how investigations work, how corrections are made, and ongoing measures to prevent future issues. And these rules must uphold the trust framework rights and minimum standards.
Including ways for users to get redress.
Yes, clear mechanisms for redress, and the potential for the scheme operator to suspend or even remove participants who are negligent or have repeated failures here.
Another potentially complex area,
Yeah.
liability, and resolving disputes within a scheme. Who's responsible if something goes wrong in a transaction, for instance? How are disagreements handled?
A clearly defined liability model is essential at the scheme level. The manual should explicitly state when liability applies, who is responsible, and any limits on that liability could even be zero liability for some parties.
Needs to be flexible.
Yeah, needs to adapt for different transaction volumes and consider the different levels of assurance associated with various digital IDs. Remember, the relying party has responsibility to choose an assurance level appropriate for the transaction's risk.
What might liability look like?
Well, liability to a relying party could be a transaction refund, compensation for direct loss up to a point, maybe a capped amount. The specifics need clear definition. There might also be financial redress for users in specific situations.
And how is liability shared or covered?
The scheme operator needs to figure that out. Maybe a portion liability, maybe operate a self-insurance fund, or require participants to have market insurance. And crucially, there must be a documented dispute resolution process, could involve independent arbitration, or maybe use the national trust framework's mechanisms.
Running a scheme like this also involves managing the money side. What are the scheme operator's key financial management responsibilities?
Right, they handle the money flow, establishing clear billing processes, invoicing relying parties, often based on volume or subscription, collecting payments.
And distributing funds.
Exactly. Managing distribution of those payments to identity service providers and others in the scheme based on agreed fee sharing. Plus, overseeing reconciliation to ensure financial records are accurate and transparent, and fixing any discrepancies.
Given the sensitivity of digital identities and data, regulatory compliance must be a huge ongoing part of the scheme operator's job.
Absolutely critical. The scheme operator plays a central role here, interpreting and ensuring compliance with all relevant legal, privacy, security, industry-specific regulations within their scheme.
How do they do that?
Implementing policies, controls, overseeing audits, managing incident reporting for security breaches or data issues, acting as the main contact with regulators. It's fundamental for safeguarding user rights, mitigating legal risks, and just maintaining the scheme's trustworthiness.
Transparency and accountability are vital for trust, which brings us to reporting obligations for the scheme operator.
Yeah, they have to define comprehensive reporting functions. Ensures transparency, accountability, ongoing monitoring of the scheme's performance,
What kind of reports?
generating and distributing regular reports to stakeholders, detailing key metrics, transaction volumes, system uptime, reliability, success rates for identity verification, financial summaries. They might need audit-ready reports too. And importantly, these reports need to be designed with privacy in mind, often anonymizing data or comparing individual participants against aggregate info.
Okay, makes sense. Finally, we have the procedures outlined in the scheme operation manual. This sounds like the real nitty-gritty, step-by-step stuff for how everything actually works day to day.
Exactly, the nuts and bolts. The scheme operator manual lays out the very specific procedures all participants must follow, covers a huge range.
Like,
Principles, commercial models, certification details, acceptance mark rules, the assurance framework, core operational procedures, program guides, privacy data protection requirements, fraud management, UX brand guidelines, liability model, audit requirements, service level agreements, technical specs.
Wow, comprehensive.
Very. Key procedures include how new participants are onboarded and accredited, checking technical setup, security, privacy, compliance, operational steps for managing identity life cycles, verification methods, authentication strength, managing verifiable attributes like age or address with consent, and robust processes for incident management and dispute resolution. These procedures ensure the consistent, secure, trustworthy operation of the scheme.
Wow, that is an incredibly detailed breakdown of the Moresburg model. It's fascinating to see how these two layers, the National Trust Framework and the Scheme Operator Governance Manuals, really complement each other.
They are indeed deeply interconnected, interdependent. The trust framework provides those overarching principles, the governance, the accreditation.
The big picture.
Right. While the scheme manuals provide the detailed, practical mechanisms for implementing those principles in specific real-world applications, it's this layered approach that aims to create a robust and, trustworthy digital identity ecosystem.
It really underscores the complexity involved, doesn't it? Building a system that effectively balances security, user convenience, and protecting individual rights in the digital age. It offers a potential blueprint, maybe, for a more seamless and secure digital future.
It does, and it prompts an important question for you, the listener, I think. Considering the profound implications of a framework like this on your own digital interactions, what specific aspects do you find most reassuring? And maybe, what aspects give you pause or concern?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Ultimately, what do you believe is the ideal balance between security, privacy, and ease of use when it comes to proving who you are online? That's a critical question to consider as these systems continue to evolve.